Architecting .NET Maui with Mitchel Sellers.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host, for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. This podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results through its ClearMeasure Way methodology for effective software teams. My architect forums are going strong. Sign-ups for the next session are up. And if you lead a software team and are looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, then just go ahead and sign up for a link on it in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking for my Programming with Palermo video podcast, you can just search in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is Mitchel Sellers. He's a globally known 15-time Microsoft MVP award winner, an ASPInsider, a .NET Nuke MVP. He's also a Microsoft certified MCP in .NET, ASP.NET, and SQL Server. And he's the CEO of IowaComputerGurus Inc. Mitchel has a deep understanding of software development, and when speaking, he focuses on proper architecture standards, performance, stability, security, and overall cost effectiveness of the delivered solution. His message and his abilities resonate in the technical war room as well as the executive boardroom. He's also a prolific public speaker. He's presented at more than 400 sessions at user groups, conferences. Some of them are DevUp, SDN, Code PaLOUsa, and he's been the author of more than one book too. And he also does regular blogging on technology topics. And when he's not working in technology, you'll find him flying his airplane or teaching others how to fly or spending time with his family. And he's also actively involved in the open source community, working diligently to further the movement. And he's also a new board member of the .NET Foundation. And you can find more about him. We'll include this in the show notes, www.mitchelsellers.com. Mitchel, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And by the way, this is breaking news. Congratulations on your election in one of those leadership positions at the .NET Foundation.
Yes, thank you. And honestly, thanks everyone for the vote of confidence to give me this opportunity. I'm excited to see what can happen over the course of the next 2 years. I've got a lot of board experience in stuff outside of the .NET Foundation, and already just a week in, I already see a lot of things that I've done for other organizations that I think I can do to help with the .NET Foundation. So excited to see what comes next.
Nice. Now, for listeners out there who are thinking, I'm a .NET developer, I didn't vote. What is this thing? Give a quick overview.
That's a really, really good question that we should have answered like months ago.
Yeah.
So the .NET Foundation, right, was created by Microsoft to help really build everything and support everything around the open source community of .NET based solutions. And you have to be a member of the .NET Foundation to join. And the membership, there's a small dues amount. I am drawing a blank right now of exactly what that dollar amount is. I probably should know it. But you join, and then anybody that is a member in good standing can vote in the elections. And if you're in a area that there would be economic hardship for you to join with a monetary value, you can submit a request to join with a either reduced or no cost membership as well. It's done there to help cover administration and support, but it is not a absolute requirement. I know that that's been a big thing, especially for some of the folks in Latin America and some of the other areas. And we want to make sure, I personally want to make sure that we are absolutely inclusive of those folks as well. But that's how you get in to join. Most of the people that are probably listening are using projects that are either members of the .NET Foundation, which includes .NET itself, but there's a lot of different things out there that you may end up using that are there. So being in there, having an ability to have a voice, I really encourage everyone to join if you're in the .NET space and doing anything with open source.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think there's still .NET developers out there that haven't checked it out yet or haven't decided whether they wanted to join. So that's good. And today, you've talked about so many topics and you're speaking at conferences all the time. You spoke at the Kansas City Developer Conference just earlier this summer, and you've got some on your schedule, so many topics. But one of the things that you're doing a lot with is .NET Maui. And that's one of the newer technologies. Some people are thinking, okay, do we wait for it to get to version 3? What's the status of tooling? What do we think of it? Oh, I don't know anybody who's put one of these in production yet. So give a rundown. Why has .NET Maui caught your attention where you're actually doing a lot of work with it? And what's your assessment on the spectrum of, hey, maybe try it out, to no, it's ready, go for it?
Having been in the .NET space for a long time, right? We've been building mobile apps for customers, and I've been doing talks about mobile app development with .NET for a long time. So we've been using Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. So I had no choice but to originally stay interested and pay attention to it because, as everybody should be aware, official support for Xamarin Forms is going to be ending in 2024, in early 2024. And the nature of how quick everything is moving from a mobile development space, especially with Apple, even Google is coming back and making a bunch of changes. It's important to be able to be on a platform that's going to be able to have 0-day support for the new releases that we're going to be able to compile against the targets that the stores need. Between Apple and Google, for example, there's already been 4 major changes to minimum version support in 2023 alone. So we're at that point now where originally we kind of had to wait and see. Maui didn't come out when it was originally planned on coming out. It did not originally ship with .NET. It ended up shipping kind of out of band, and then now it's kind of going back to being in lockstep. Tooling initially there was areas of improvement. It's gotten a lot better. We still have a lot of things to go, but I think that from my perspective, with anybody and people that I meet at conferences, what we're doing internally is we have to be all in, because with Xamarin Forms support ending officially in early 2024, we have new versions of iOS, that are coming out later this year. I think it's fairly safe to just assume Maui's where the investment's going to be in that. Even though Xamarin Forms still has a little bit of life left in it, we really need to be looking at moving forward. Upgrades are still a little bit fun. We've done a number of them. Some of you that follow me on Twitter may have seen some of my complaining. We learned about a couple fun bugs in the MS Build system with .NET Maui that Microsoft was very nice to help me with. And I have a blog post about what we ran into. But so for me, it's about staying forward and being able to go with our customers. But what's been really compelling for me with .NET Maui is we also have a new iteration for development with Maui, and that is the .NET Maui Blazor hybrid model, which for those of you that haven't seen that or haven't worked with it yet, .NET Maui is the traditional XAML based, looks like WPF or anything else XAML, right? I'm a web developer primarily. Most of my work is ASP.NET stuff, most of my team. We do XAML, not great sometimes. So for us, being able to do stuff in the web kind of opened up a door. It's still native on the devices. We're still able to do all of the things with the devices that we wanted to do. But now we've been able to do an architecture that is kind of unique. It's something that we've had a number of clients ask for. And that is, they want to not only have the app work on an iOS device, an Android device, a Windows device, and a Mac, they also want it to work on the web in the same way. And out of the box, you can't do that with Maui. You can't do that out of the box with Maui Blazor Hybrid. However, with the addition of a traditional Blazor project and a shared component library, you can share about 95, 98% of the code and accomplish that. So we have 3 different projects right now that we're developing that are using that model to go to all of those targets. And it's amazing the productivity gains that we've had, and then the feature parity that we'll be able to have across all of the devices. So it's definitely exciting, a little bit uncharted territory, but it's been really fun seeing how much more productive we can be.
Nice. Now, what has been your experience pushing Maui applications to the various app stores?
So the ones that I've controlled, we have been completely successful. We have 7 Maui apps that are under my control that are in the stores today. A couple of them are traditional Maui apps. A couple of them are Blazor hybrids. Everything is fine. The only thing that I've ran into is we had one of our customers that we provide architecture assistance to. They were rejected initially. And that's because there's this concept of how much do you tell the reviewers? And the real answer is you tell the reviewers about as much as you tell the police officer when you get pulled over. You tell them what they need to know to be able to get their job done. We had a client that sent in, oh, this is a web-based with .NET Maui Blazor hybrid in there. And the reviewers were like, oh, it's a web app, and didn't even review the app. It was an instant rejection. We went back and said, apologies for the miscommunication. It is, this is a mobile app. It is specific for this device. It's built targeting iOS. Blaze through right after that. So we have seen one rejection with it, and it was mostly because of what somebody said. And that's not uncommon. Yeah. I've seen it with all of the other tools as well. If you put a trigger word in there, you're going to get those reviewers. So we've not seen any issues at all. The one thing we've actually gotten a compliment on in 2 of our reviews is the performance difference between our old version and our new version. Application startup time is about maybe 10% of what it was for the same app going from Xamarin Forms to Maui.
Oh, nice.
Which is something that we were not expecting. It's instantaneous. Like our splash screens aren't even visible anymore, which is kind of cool.
Nice. Now, I was hoping with your experience that you could talk about the general architecture that you have settled on. So with a mobile app, you've got some code running on the device. It's consuming CPU, consuming memory, and then it's calling over the network to some type of server, and you've probably got databases, data stores, other systems somewhere, and you got a choice between web services or maybe some asynchronous messaging for some transactions, or even SignalR. There's so many different ways that you can call across the network. So how do you think, and what do you think the most applicable patterns are when you're just kind of laying out the spread of a Maui application?
I think that's probably the hardest decision for anybody in modern times, is which technologies do we use? And I think Maui makes it, even harder, because going onto the devices, right, our update cycles are a little bit different. I can't just deploy code tomorrow and have it go out to everybody. So we have to really be planning ahead. We've really focused on the specific task at hand, and then we'll utilize different things for different situations. SignalR, for example, is our absolute go-to for any type of real-time messaging or things within our apps. So, we're building apps primarily for customer specifications. And one of the things that we've been doing more and more of for multiple different client implementations is chat amongst users of the applications. Sometimes that's just other employees or staff. SignalR makes that kind of communication fantastic. It lowers the level of effort for us to be able to do it, and it makes it a lot easier from my developers to just be able to get things done. For most other things, we are traditional, web API, Azure functions as necessary. Just depends on the client's architecture. We found that less is more in some ways. We have a few clients that have loved to put like Azure API management in front of things. We had a recent experience where that became a nightmare because nobody knew the mapping. So, one of the things that I think is imperative, regardless of what you do, is architect what you want, but then make sure that architecture gets documented, because I think that it's really easy to build something that looked awesome and to leverage, hey, we got these new features in Azure, But if nobody understands that, oh, I make a call from the mobile app to Azure API and I call it this, but then I go from Azure API to this web API, or I go to this third-party service, if people don't know how those mappings work or where those responsible parties are, it can become a support nightmare to unravel, because the next thing you know, you're clicking through with one individual definition at a time. Oh, where does this go? Oh, where does this go? Because the Azure portal, for example, just isn't a great place to manage that kind of thing. So it's definitely there. And there's new stuff for offline data sync, for example, coming out of Microsoft that's on our testing process right now for doing, the offline data store and synchronizing that to a set of APIs. We've not used that in production yet, but we're working towards some of that right now as well.
You mentioned that it was more difficult to make updates to the Maui application because it's on the device and you don't know when they're gonna upgrade to the next version. So with that, do you find yourself recommending and preferring to only call out to server-side endpoints and APIs that you control instead of calling out directly to maybe third-party providers? How do you think about that?
We do prefer a centralized location, and as much of that logic or as much of the things that we can control, getting them into something that we can update outside of the app stores. Absolutely. Because really when it comes to pushing to a device, right, you can go to Google and say, this is a preferred release, we need to force an update. You can build logic into your app that says, oh gosh, a new version came out, you've got to upgrade. We've all seen it, right? Some of the mobile banking apps do it, some of the games that you might play or otherwise, they do that. But that's a really horrible user experience when it might have not been something that they even cared about, right? Yeah. Maybe a downstream vendor changed something, you want to be able to update it. So I do prefer to try to get that stuff centralized, whether it be Azure API service, whether it be our own stuff. It does put more data through your services, but it gives you that control, because the reality is with anything targeting Android or iOS, let's just say we make a change right now. I can submit it to the App Store.
Yep.
Now, I can submit it to Google and Apple at the exact same time. Now, if you came to me a year ago, which one would you get done first? Which one do you think would get done first?
Android?
Right? That was what everybody thought. Right now, we're running 4 to 5 days for a Google Store review. Okay. I'm averaging 6 hours with iOS. And it's totally opposite land. Not what we expected before. And you can delay things, but it gets a little bit hard to time that, especially as you get larger user bases and if something happens. So integrity in your development process is the other really big thing that we have to push with our teams, especially those that are coming from a web application perspective, right? Right or wrong, my web developers are fairly well versed with the fact that if I need to do a release at 2:00 in the afternoon, I can do a release at 2:00 in the afternoon and it doesn't impact anybody.
Right.
We can't do that necessarily with these mobile apps. So it definitely does cause some training. So anything that we can do to mitigate and bring that logic into a central place definitely has been helpful.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
I think that's a really good point, because code that has been working for a while, it doesn't just stop working. It's the integrations between systems Those are the things that, oh, surprise, now it's not working. Now we have a bug. And what is it? Well, some downstream system changed something that they thought would be compatible, but guess what? There was something about it, and now you're literally down. That button click literally doesn't work anymore. And yeah, you're right. If now your app, there's a button in your app that literally just doesn't work, you want a very quick path to resolve it.
And the thing is we're seeing more of it, right? That used to be the exception. Now it's almost the rule. A TLS update, a certificate update, the cycling of night. I mean, it's just amazing the number of things that you get from emails from vendors. Hey, we're changing this, shouldn't be a big deal. Or we're changing this and it is a big deal. And they know about it, right? So that's where we've definitely tried really hard to balance what we're doing. I think it's one of the biggest struggles when you go to develop for mobile devices is as much as you have control, you have no control over the last bits of that application. You can't just instantly update everybody's device at the same time. API versioning, for example, is something that people don't think about. But if you make a big change and you have somebody that's using the old version of the app and the new version of the app adds new features, if you don't version your APIs, you either have to really handle null values and data integrity, or you have to actually version it so that you can keep that old version, new version. And then you have to monitor. Analytics is the other thing that I think people overlook the most. Who's using our apps and what versions of the apps are they using, right? We always talk about analytics of usage and whether it be, Google Analytics or anything, right? You want to know your number of people. So few people forget about the concept of, oh gosh, they're on version X, or they're on an iPhone 12, they're on iPhone 14. When we talk with .NET Maui, to do the Blazor hybrid, we have to have a minimum of iOS 14.
Oh, that's pretty recent.
It's pretty recent. Not too crazy because Apple had really pushed to get you to 14 for some security things. But you had to be aware of that. And a lot of people that are on older platforms that didn't have metrics with it, and you say, well, what's your Xamarin Forms user base? What are they using? If you can't answer those questions, it's just one more reason that you have to take that step back and look at, can we make this work?
Right.
And how do we make it work in a way that keeps everybody happy?
So you mentioned knowing what versions of the operating system and what versions of your app that you're running. Holistically, what does your analytics and telemetry suite look like, just to get the full coverage to know what the application is doing and what your users are doing with the application? What tools and what techniques do you find you just immediately would bring into the next Maui project?
So, some of it depends on if our clients are Azure focused or not. Some depends on if they have existing log streams in place. We have existing log streams, for example, using SEQ or Seri. It's from the guy
Serilogs. Yeah, Seek.
It's primitive for that type of analytics, but at the same time, it is really robust and easy, and I can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
And we send just device-specific things. App Center is something that still exists from Microsoft to be able to get some basic utilization. So we end up, unfortunately, I don't have this is what we do always. What I do have is I always want to know how many times has the app started? How many times is each individual action completed? What happens with a crash? I want that crash going somewhere. I don't really care where it goes, but I want it to go somewhere. And we then always back it up on the other side with metrics and analytics on the API side. Some mobile apps are incredibly API chat heavy, where I don't need to do a ton of analytics on the client side at all, because I can get it from the analytics. One of the things that we've done in those scenarios that's kind of funny, but a real easy way to get it into one place, is we pass essentially our own little user agent string, if you will, with every API. And we take device-specific information and just pass it in with every API call. So then I can keep track on just our API logging side. oh, this came from iOS, this came from an Android device, it came with this screen resolution and that kind of thing. Rather than having to meld data from multiple sources, I can log everything with the same thing. And then I can track action usage and everything else. So it's unfortunately, I do such a diverse set of projects that it's been a little bit more one-off than I want it to be. And I'm hoping in the next year to have a little bit better insight as to what this is our bare minimum. To make it a little more consistent.
Yeah, the tooling, there's no end of tools and tool vendors, but it seems like the principles that I'm hearing you talk about are pretty consistent.
Exactly. And sometimes, right, we run into, some of the tools, they're awesome, but they're really expensive. Even, ASPInsider from Azure. It's awesome. It's really powerful for everything, but at an ingestion rate of, $2 a gigabyte for some of our clients, their analytics ingestion is more than their hosting bill. And it doesn't work, right? So we sometimes have to compromise. And that's why I don't think we have any real solid, we always do it this way. But I know the things I want to be able to answer. I want to know what happened. I want to know how much things are being used. And I need to know the detail of why did my app crash? Because end user reports from mobile device users are typically not very helpful. They don't know how to send it, right? They don't know how to send a screenshot, or a lot of them don't know how to record a video of what they did. And it becomes a really big feedback cycle. So if I can get, an exception with a good stack trace to then go back, oh, these are the two things they did before it, I can usually figure out what happened.
Yeah, good point. Now you mentioned App Center. For a modern .NET Maui application, what is the DevOps environment? I know, let's just put some blinders on. Let's just say it's 100% Microsoft Azure. So what is the DevOps story for Maui applications these days, from continuous integration to automated testing to deployments and versioning?
Well, it's a fun story. And there's so many different ways to skin the cat that it really depends on what you're doing. My team, we've gone more to GitHub Actions for our build environments than anything else. Similar processes could be done in Azure DevOps, but we have full automation for unit test execution and then builds for the individual targets. We've been playing with one build for each target, one mega build, and one matrix build. I think right now our running future decision is a matrix-based build that actually it basically allows us to cut about 18 minutes off of our build time by splitting it into a matrix, but still managing it in one larger YAML. And so what we do is we matrix based on target. And so for a traditional app that's maybe Windows, iOS, and Android, we'll actually have the matrix have 4 legs to it. We'll have a test matrix, a Windows matrix element, an iOS, and an Android. And so for each of those, we do whatever setup things are necessary, right? For iOS, you need to bring in your published profiles. You need to bring in your signing certificates. For Android, you need to maybe bring in your key store or whatever else you need to do. For Windows, you don't really need to do much unless you're signing. Again, bring in your certs. So we do all of that the same, and then we do our unit testing kind of off to the side. And what we've settled on is we do turn on rapid fail. And the reasoning behind it right now is if any of those things mess up, let's stop and fix it. It kind of sucks because you could have a really little thing that stopped it early on, but we're trying to also not burn up 24 minutes of build every time. Because a mobile app that targets Windows, iOS, Android, and has unit testing is going to be around a 20 to 24 minute build if you're packaging for release. There's just not much you can do around
the packaging step is what takes most of that.
The packaging step is where almost everything gets consumed. Packaging for Android is 4 minutes on average in GitHub Actions. iOS, it's 6-ish minutes, that kind of thing. So by doing the matrix, I'm able to take the the wall clock time and make it substantially shorter. So we do all of that. Automated UI testing, it's not a feature right now. If you go look at Microsoft's guidance, or at least certain configurations, for us in the .NET Maui Blazor, it is not a feature. It does not exist, and most of the tools do not work.
Yeah.
There is plans for it. I don't know that it's going to make it in .NET 8. I'm guessing it's going to end up being .NET 9 now. But so we do not have automated UI testing. Now, there are some really smart people out there that have circumvented the limitations and they've found ways to do it. We've opted to focus more on manual testing for the UI layer.
Okay.
But to that point, we've automated the daylights out of the APIs and all of the backend stuff to mitigate as much as we can.
Yeah.
And then we automate deployment directly to the app stores because, again, App Center, it's supported for analytics and everything else in a lot of things, but it's not supported for the device pushing for .NET Maui Blazor, at least as of right now. So we actually use a build step to push to test flight for iOS, and then we use a build step to push right into Google as well. But we do still use App Center for certain analytics pieces right now.
Okay.
In the Maui space.
So you're using GitHub Actions, which of the steps require which operating system hosted agents?
So the iOS build requires a Mac agent. The Android one can be done on anything. Our unit test can be done on anything. What we have found, oddly, is that the Android build in certain apps, not all of them, and I don't know why, runs a little faster on Mac OS. No idea why. It's been a thing. It was that way in Xamarin Forms even, where the Android builds were faster on Mac OS. But we are trying our best to use Mac OS for iOS only, Windows for the Windows deployment, and then our unit tests, we are typically running those on a Linux runner if we can, just because the unit tests tend to take longer time to run, and we can get a little bit of a cost savings in terms of minutes used by doing it that way. It really depends. You do run some risk when you do that, specifically with file path things. If you are writing local files and things like that, because of the whole slashes go this way versus slashes go that way, where you can get some funny false failures depending on which way you go. But we try to do as much as we can to not use the Mac runners just because of, minutes consumed more than anything.
Yeah. And if you are only running on Mac, then really you could have a latent bug of some sort if you literally never have it touch the others.
Yeah. You can actually build the Windows one from Mac. It takes a long time and you have to set a couple config settings to get it to work. It's never seemed right to me to build the Windows MSIX from a Mac, but you absolutely can. And I think some of it, when I talk to other dev teams, my development team, we're all Windows PC users. Some of us, maybe it's just me, I have a hatred for my Mac keyboard. My fingers don't work that way. The buttons are in the wrong spot. So we're Windows users. We're going to tend to go the Windows route and use the Mac when we need to. I do see other teams that are Mac developers and they're on a Mac all day, every day. They'll do the flip side just because that's what they're comfortable with. I've not seen any guidance that says one is more successful than the other.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything yet.
So for longtime .NET developers who've done just a ton of ASP.NET, am I putting words in your mouth to say that your favorite is Maui with Blazor, or what is your thinking, and what do you think that when you have control, your next Maui app might be? So
I actually agree with the Microsoft guidance on this one. If you are a web developer and you've always been a web developer and that's where you're comfortable, looking at .NET Maui Blazor is a much faster, I can get working today behavior. You can still use the same tools and techniques and everything that you're looking for. If you are a developer that's been in Xamarin, or you're a WPF developer, or where you're used to the way that XAML works, going traditional .NET Maui is the way to go. You still have the ability to go on device and do device specific stuff. The only other exception to that is when you do Maui Blazor, your app is going to look the same on Android as it is in iOS, as it is on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, that is a plus. They want it to look the same. What you get with a traditional Maui application, though, that's not using the Blazor hybrid, is when you use a button, it goes to look like a button of the OS that it's on. If you use a text input, it looks like the OS of the device that you're on.
Yeah.
That difference is very interesting because we've had clients that's actually been a killer. They hated it. They didn't want it to be correct. And then we've had others that are like, well, but it should always be right here because that's the way it is in Android.
Yeah.
So you do have to kind of take into consideration developer experience, which might point you one way versus the other, and end user expectation. It's not that a Maui Blazor app doesn't look professional. They absolutely do. And most of the time people won't know, but it will not take on a OS shift look and feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to make sure that your business stakeholders are aware of that.
Yeah. Hey, good point. Well, Mitchel, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your real world experience, pushing 6-7 Maui apps into the app stores and getting them into production. So many developers that I've spoken with are excited about this and eager for it, but they're just waiting. Okay, when is it really ready? I don't want it to bite me.
Even talking with Microsoft, right? I don't know that there's apps out there, but I don't think the number is nearly as high as even I had hoped it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also drop into chat a GitHub link for you if you want to put in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
One of the conference talks that I've been doing a lot this year shows the architecture of the Maui Blazor hybrid shared with the web app because there's no guidance anywhere out there for it. I've got a full sample repository out there that kind of shows the basis of it, and I'm continuing to update that. So something that's kind of worthwhile for folks that might be interested in looking at something. For sure.
Well, thanks so much for the time. This has been great, and we'll include all those links in the show notes. And Mitchel, where can listeners find you speaking next?
That is a really good question. My next one, I believe, is going to be, so I'll be at IndyCode in Indianapolis on Friday, August 11th. And then I think the next one after that is DevUp in St. Louis at the end of August. And those are the next two.
Busy flying schedule.
That it is.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Mitchel.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.